Thank you. That's good. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And I want to mention that today's press conference highlights the introduction of 4 bills that will improve the administration of criminal justice in America. In recent months, there's been an increase in the number of our citizens recognizing great faults in the national criminal justice system, and it's critical that we adopt smarter approaches to dealing with those involved in the criminal justice system.
Mike's not on.
Yeah, I don't think that's good. We're just having some
This
feedback.
isn't on?
The mic is on, but we're having some feedback issues.
As we meet today to highlight the introduction of police practices legislation, the nation's attention is of course focused on Waller County, Texas, in the case of Sandra Bryant. The question is, how does a routine traffic stop lead to an arrest and a death in custody 3 days later? Along with several incidents in Shelby County, Tennessee over the weekend, it seems clear that improved national standards are necessary to address the ever-growing catalog of evidence. My colleague, a senior member of the House Judiciary Committee in the Congress, Sheila Jackson-Lee, has joined with me in introducing the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act. And today I joined her in introducing not 1, but 3 bills to change the way we approach the issues of sentencing and incarceration of youth in the federal system. We will have a long way to go, but that's what we're here for, to make things better. The sooner, the better. Expungement and sealing of federal convictions for offenses committed by young people and the humane confinement of youth. The introduction of the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act responds to diminishment of public confidence in law enforcement, particularly at the local and state level. Though the vast majority of our police officers perform their duties in accord with the standards we expect, put their lives on the line, there are unfortunately some whose actions have unjustly harmed citizens, sometimes resulting in death, jeopardizing the relationships of the police departments and the communities they serve. Specifically, this legislation will help improve standards for law enforcement accreditation, provide grants to state and local government and private organizations, authorize funding assistance to Justice Department's Civil Rights Division and Community Relations Service, create a task force within the Department of Justice to coordinate investigations involving instances of law enforcement misconduct and establish better data collection concerning traffic stops, pedestrian stops, and detention, and the use of deadly force by and against law enforcement officers. These provisions are an effort to assist police departments across the country. And together these bills will provide critical improvements to policing engagement between citizens and law enforcement, which is a big underlying purpose of us all coming together like this. And so we urge these proposals be among those adopted by the House. And now, with great pleasure, I reintroduce the great lady from Texas, Sheila Jackson-Lee.
Thank you very much.
Today was a day of pain but joy. And it also is a day of commitment. And I am very happy to join my friend, my chairman, for his long legacy of knowledge and creativity in the criminal justice system, the Honorable Lee-Conyers. The people behind us stand for what we're doing today, meaning that they signify the broad depth of support for the legislation that we're introducing today, with the numbers of members of Congress that have joined us, and as well the organizations. You see, today was the day of these who are standing behind us. It wasn't our day, members of Congress. It was to bring the body politic of those whose hands are touching these issues every day. So I'll be very quick to say that I'm excited about joining Mr. Conyers on a very important initiative dealing with law enforcement, not against law enforcement, but working together in making sure that law enforcement has the tools of which they accept to do what they want to do, to be the guardians of society, the protectors of society, and the mutual respect that we all have for them. The Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act, and please take that name very seriously. Not the Condemnation Act, but the Trust and Integrity Act. Is an effective law enforcement requires the confidence of the community, and even in the backdrop of Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Freddie Gray, Walter Scott, and McKinney, Texas, all of us know law enforcement officers that we love and admire and are our friends. That is what America should be. And H.R. 2875, the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act, says just that. Any numbers of police departments are not accredited. They have no roadmap. And this is a roadmap. A nationwide accreditation standards, funding to law enforcement agencies, comprehensive data, a bill of quality and standards. And frankly, I believe that we can make a big statement today. For only 5% of the agencies participate in a national accreditation program. And so, I might add that cities like my own city in Houston, or McKinney, Texas, or Stone Mountain, Georgia, or Purview, all would benefit from this very important legislation. I'm delighted to have Mr. Conyers also recognize that the beginning of life, our young people, are our riches and gold. For those of you who've been past the church once in a while, you know about I'd rather have silver and gold or rather not have silver and gold for mercy. And so we want to give our children an opportunity to be different. Today, as we close our eyes, we got a sense of the belly of the beast. We want to move away from that in a three-point process. The RAISE Act, which provides for lifting our children, reforming alternatives to incarceration, more flexible sentencing, increasing home confinement. The Fair Chance for Youth Act, better labels young people to reenter and contribute to communities, sealing or expungement of certain youth criminal acts. And then, Caliph's Law. As Mrs. Browder said, his mother, she would rather be any other place than here today. But if she had to be here today, we wanted to say to her that not the simple statement of his life will not be in vain, but that his life will be a meteor soaring above the stars, to ban the use of solitary confinement and to recognize the value of our children. That is So, I tried to be, as they say, pithy, and moving on. But I thank you for that, and I'm delighted to be able to have a long litany of very important leaders in our community. It allows me the opportunity to see the broad depth of support by introducing Gregory Thomas of Noble. Thank you for your leadership and the special service that you have given to the men and women of the United States of America.
Good afternoon. I bring you greetings on behalf of the Executive Board and International Membership of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, commonly referred to as NOBLE. Again, I'm the National President of NOBLE, And we applaud Congressman John Conyers and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee for their efforts to pass legislation that address two key areas of our criminal justice system: law enforcement and the juvenile justice system. The Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act takes a key step in implementing the recommendations from President Barack Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, with the ultimate goal of strengthening the partnership between law enforcement and the community through efforts to ensure that law enforcement agencies are given the assistance that they need to put their best professional foot forward. Since our founding in 1976, Noble has sought to bring to the forefront of public discourse the need to have all law enforcement agencies provide unbiased, equitable services to the communities that they serve. We believe that the Law Enforcement Integrity Act begins to do just that by outlining opportunities for law enforcement agencies across our nation to better measure themselves through the use of evidence-based standards that will ensure that the end beneficiaries, our communities and its residents, are serviced in a manner that will protect and preserve their basic rights as American citizens. Noble also is concerned about laws and policies that ensure that all children are treated fairly regardless of their race or ethnicity. Although minorities make up 1/3 of the total U.S. youth population, they make up nearly 2/3 of the young offenders who are in prison. Research shows that African American youth comprise 15% of the national youth population, but are nearly 60% of young offenders who are serving time in adult state prisons. Noble believes that the youth incarceration reform legislation that is being introduced today by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee is a key first step in assisting policymakers, law enforcement officials, community stakeholders, and the public at large in working together to ensure that there's equity in the administration of juvenile justice. I am joined today at this press conference today by Noble's National Second Vice President, who's the Chief of Police for the Clayton County, Georgia schools, Mr. Clarence Cox, to my right. I'm joined also by Deputy Chief Ham from the Baltimore City Public Schools, who's here to my left. And by virtue of their daily roles, both Chief Cox and Chief Ham work hard to ensure that young men and women in the school systems are given a fair shot as they explore their newfound sense of independence in elementary schools, middle and high schools throughout their districts. Chief Cox and Chief Ham and our Executive Board on International Membership applaud Congresswoman Lee for taking a monumental step to ensure that all children get a fair shot moving closer to adulthood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Baltimore City Schools. Sheriff High. Prince Justice County. PG County.
Well, we are blessed to have who I recognize, Sheriff High of Prince George's County, to be here as well. We've got the sheriff and police departments. That's making a very big statement. Thank you all for that. Let me take the liberty of introducing Dr. Davis, who came all the way from Arlington, Texas. She had powerful testimony. Mr. Chairman, I want to make sure that she is a witness before our Judiciary Committee. She is powerful. But come up and stand with us, please. Thank you. Important to introduce and to have Julie Stewart discusses the need for sentencing. She is going to recognize Hillary Shelton. Thank you so very much. Is Julie here?
I'm going to.
Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. Also, thank you very much for introducing these bills. They're very important. I am the president and founder of Families Against Mandatory Minimums, and for 24 years I have heard from a lot of people who have served great deals of decades behind bars, and many of them probably have experienced some of what we heard today, although I have to say what I heard today was the most sobering thing I've heard in a very long time. But proponents of mandatory minimum sentences will tell you that long sentences are created to deter young people and adults from engaging in illegal activity. But as any parent can tell you, the last thing your child does before they make a stupid mistake is do a well-informed cost-benefit analysis about the rewards and options of their choice. So that's just not what the brain does. As you heard earlier today, kids don't even develop until at least age 25. And I also think the deterrent theory is a pretty big failure with grown-ups as well. So so I think that mandatory minimums just basically need to be abolished. They kill a young person's chance of having a future. And this bill, the RAISE Act, would give judges the flexibility to give sentences that recognize both the pitfalls and the promises of youth. As the gentleman who's spoken already today let you know, there is so much behind the person who finally commits the crime, whatever the crime is. And that history, especially when you're young and you've had many disadvantages, even if you've had an advantaged life, there's a story there, and by the time you're only 15, 16, 18, 21, you should not be going to prison for the rest of your life or for decades. And that's what the RAISE Act would do, is to help reduce that kind of incarceration that leads to the kind of solitary confinement and punishments that we heard earlier today. So I just want to say thank you, Congressman Lee-Conyers.
You're more than welcome.
And Dr. Lee, thank you so much for your leadership on this, and we're very much behind you.
Thank you.
He needs no introduction. I'm not going to touch this mic because he's tall. Hillary Shelton of the NAACP. He is taking Clarence Mitchell's 101st senator all the way up to the highest level. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Conyers and Congressman Sheila Jackson-Lee. On behalf of the NAACP, our nation's oldest and largest grassroots-based civil rights organization, with units in every state throughout the United States and with members everywhere, we want to thank you on behalf of our association for introducing this crucial legislation. Together, these proposals address a serious problem in the communities served and represented by the NAACP. Too many of our youth are caught up in the criminal justice system, and too often the results are harmful and even fatal. Today, the media is beginning to shine a brighter light and expose what many of us have seen for years. People of color are treated more aggressively and with more physical force, including deadly force, by law enforcement agents at every level. The NAACP was a strong supporter of the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act when it was first introduced in the 106th Congress, and we see even more urgent need for this crucial legislation to come to pass today. The Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act instills a sense of fairness and uniformity. It will make sure that law enforcement officials are held accountable for treating everyone equally and humanely by the men and women who are hired and sworn to protect and serve our communities. Yet we are living today in a society in which on any given day, for African American males in their 30s, 1 in every 10 is in a prison or jail cell. And while African American youth are about 16% of our national population, they are 28% of juveniles arrested, 37% of youth in juvenile incarceration facilities, and 58% of youth sent to adult prisons. That is why the legislation being introduced by Congressman Sheila Jackson-Lee is such an important component in fixing this broken system. The bills being offered by Congressman Jackson-Lee connect and work hand in hand with legislation the NAACP has long endorsed by Congressman Bobby Scott, the Youth Promise Act. We see this as part of a major piece to address this very comprehensive problem. Once enacted and put into action, Congressman Scott's initiative will make tremendous strides in helping at-risk youth stay out of gangs and away from violence. We also strongly support efforts here to end in other bodies by Senator Grassley to reauthorize the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act, or JJDPA. The legislation being introduced by Congressman Jackson-Lee today targets specific issues which affect children already involved in our criminal justice system, problems which affect a disproportionate number of African American youth. Her bills will ensure that judges have more flexibility and judicial discretion when sentencing nonviolent offenders, that youth are treated to a speedy trial, that they are not relegated to the proven dangers of solitary confinement, and that their records, particularly those of nonviolent offenders, are expunged or sealed. We're convinced that this will allow more of our children the opportunity to apply for jobs without concerns that mistakes they made as youth continue to haunt and stymie them as rehabilitated adults seeking the opportunity to fully participate and contribute to our society. Let me personally thank Congressman Conyers and Congresswoman Jackson-Lee, who we absolutely wore out at our convention just last week, for their visionary and vital acts in drafting and introducing these important bills. The sad truth is, as the data clearly demonstrates, the color of your skin greatly affects how you are treated by law enforcement throughout our nation today. These crucial bills will help assure decent, humane treatment for all Americans who make mistakes and seek the opportunity to grow, learn from their errors, and contribute to the reality of a more perfect union. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, it is my deep honor and my privilege to present to you the President and Chief Executive Officer of the United Negro College Fund, Dr. Michael Lomax.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton. On behalf of the UNCF, America's largest and oldest minority higher education support organization, I'm delighted to join this press conference in strong support of the legislative packet prepared by Representatives John Conyers and Sheila Jackson-Lee, which would help to reform our criminal justice system for all American youth, including and especially those who are brought into it more systematically, that is, young men of color and young women of color, and improve training for law enforcement. Mr. Conyers and Ms. Jackson-Lee have been stalwarts in their unyielding efforts to ensure that our criminal justice system is fair and that African Americans and other minorities are not victimized by inhumane treatment in the federal and state prison systems. We owe them our thanks, and we owe them our an all-out campaign to pass this legislation. The death of Khalif Browder, a young African-American male who suffered through 3 years of abusive treatment while imprisoned on Rikers Island in New York without being convicted of any crime, has once again brought into sharp relief the need for the type of reforms that the Conyers-Jackson-Lee omnibus young offenders legislation would bring about. I'm here today to plead the case not only for the critical need for the kinds of reforms that this legislation would enact, but for the crucial role that education can play in keeping young people like Khalif Browder from becoming entangled in the justice system, and the role education can play once they are in that system in getting them back on the path to a productive life. Before his arrest, Khalif Browder was on the path. A very smart student, in the words of one school staff member at a progressive high school. After an unwarranted confinement, he was sucked into the vortex of the criminal justice system like so many other seemingly invisible minority youth. Unfortunately, Khalif is far from an isolated case. In both prison cells and in our classrooms, young African-American boys and girls too often receive over-harsh discipline and unjustified penalties. In 2012, black males were 6 times more likely to be in prison than white males, less likely to receive academic support and caring that they need to succeed in the classroom, and less likely to be given second chances. That's why UNCF tirelessly advocates for the importance of high-quality K-12 education and reforms to school discipline, which disproportionately punish children of color, and the scholarships for minority and low-income families so that we can build a pipeline to college and to career instead of building a pipeline to prison. So, in addition to enacting the youth offender reforms being launched today, we need as a society to intervene early to keep our young people from being detoured into the back streets that lead to incarceration. And when necessary, we need to intervene later to keep that detour from becoming a dead end. One of the wonderful features of this bill is expunging records that prejudice college admissions, even when a student has paid his or her debt to society. Not only to keep young people from lives of incarceration, but to make a more just society, a society with more black police officers, police chiefs, more prosecutors, judges, and defense attorneys. And when we get them on a productive pathway, we need to give them the caring, mentoring, and academic support and college assistance they need. For example, Congress must pass the groundbreaking America's College Promise Act, which will ensure that more of our kids, if they are incarcerated and they get out, they can go to community college for free or attend an HBCU.
Here, here.
fewer young black men and women behind bars and far more young black men and women behind the desks in college classrooms and in their communities to create better futures for them and for all of us. We need to start now by getting behind Sheila Jackson Lee and John Conyers and doing everything within our power to secure passage for the RAISE Act, the Fair Chance for Young Offenders Act, the Browder's Bill, the Conyers-Jackson-Lee Omnibus Young Offenders Package. And now, let me introduce Susan Bergeron of the National Urban League.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lomax. I bring greetings today from the National Urban League President, Mark Morial, and sincere appreciation to Ranking Member Lee-Conyers and Ranking Woman Sheila Jackson Lee for this important day of legislation. And I am humbled to have been asked to read a statement on his behalf. As President and CEO of the National Urban League and former Mayor of New Orleans, I am calling on Congress today to act now on two key legislative measures unveiled today that are long overdue in addressing the tragic breakdown of police-community relations in our nation, particularly in communities of color, and in reforming the deplorable treatment of young offenders who are incarcerated in our adult criminal justice system. The Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act and the package of youth incarceration reform legislation being introduced today represent concrete proposals that stand to benefit from the bipartisan momentum towards achieving criminal justice reform in this 114th Congress. We must now move from talk to action. With respect to law enforcement reform, I say to Congress, now is the time to get it right. We must take a comprehensive and bold approach that is multifaceted and simultaneous, because urban communities are in a state of crisis, with life and death consequences for unarmed African American men and women interacting with law enforcement, and serious consequences for the police as well. A tragic deja vu continues to play out in communities all across America, particularly in the growing skeptical streets of black and brown neighborhoods. Our nation is forced to grapple with fresh accounts of police misconduct and its deadliest incarnation, where the victims are unarmed black men and women, and the perpetrators are the very public servants charged with keeping them, in fact, all of us safe. It seems only the states and the circumstances change. The recent litany of cases involving the use of excessive and deadly force, police force against unarmed African Americans is only the tip of the iceberg. Our youth and their emerging leaders are telling us enough is enough. The National Urban League believes that the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act, introduced by House Judiciary Committee Ranking Member John Conyers, and its many co-sponsors will mark the first concrete and immediate step in a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to bring about historic change in the tragic breakdown of police-community relations in our nation, particularly in communities of color. H.R. 2875 provides incentives for local police organizations to voluntarily adopt performance-based standards to ensure that incidents of misconduct will be minimized through appropriate management, training, and oversight protocols, and that if such incidents do occur, that they will be properly investigated. This approach to law enforcement reform aligns with the National Urban League's 10-point Justice Plan for Police Reform and Accountability that was released at the end of 2014 and submitted this year to the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. The National Urban League believes that the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act will lead us to a new generation of policing strategies for the 21st century that ensure the safety of all of our citizens and communities while also protecting everyone's civil rights. The National Urban League also applauds House Judiciary Subcommittee Ranking Member Sheila Jackson Lee for championing the need to bring comprehensive reform to the deplorable treatment of our young offenders who are incarcerated in our adult criminal justice system. Her 3 legislative proposals focus on sentencing and incarceration in the federal system, humane confinement, and on re-entry in society.
Among the many key provisions, the proposed bills would end mandatory life imprisonment for incarcerated youth, establish pilot programs to give incarcerated youth the opportunity to receive mentorship and to gain skills through government and community service, allow formerly incarcerated youth to petition for expungement, ban the use of solitary confinement for youth in federal facilities, ban the shackling and restraint of juveniles during court appearances, and reauthorize the Juvenile Accountability Block Grant, and this is among many other proposals in your legislation. Whether in St. Louis, Missouri, Baltimore, Maryland, Charleston, South Carolina, Cleveland, Ohio, through its community-based network of 95 Urban League affiliates in 36 states and the District of Columbia, the National Urban League is doing its part on a daily basis to meet the direct service needs of our youth and young adults who are disconnected from our schools and our workforce through our after-school programs, our urban youth empowerment program, and our adult reentry programs. We are doing our part to keep our communities safe and productive. Now Congress must do its part and immediately act on these comprehensive and much-needed reform measures.
We will hear from the interfaith community, and then we will hear from the Browder Cayley family. And please, we want to be able to hear them and to understand their story. Now, faith community, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Andrea Alexander. I'm the Associate General Secretary for Action and Advocacy for the National Council of Churches. We are partners with the Interfaith Criminal Justice Coalition and the Civil Rights Coalition. These partnerships include over 100 faith-based and civil rights organizations. At the core of our common beliefs is the intrinsic and sacred worth of all people and the commitment to reforming the adult and juvenile justice systems that's predicated on punishment and retribution rather than rehabilitation and reconciliation. The U.S. criminal justice system is severely broken, resulting in a huge crisis of mass incarceration and over-criminalization. We're particularly troubled by systems impact on families and children. Among the saddest of statistics is that some 10 million young people have had a mother or father or both spend time behind bars at some point in their lives. These children, the likelihood of these children entering the criminal justice system is greatly increased. In the tradition of the Maasai tribe of Africa, if we were to ask our country, how are the children? What would the answer be? A resounding no. Our children, particularly children of color, they're not healthy economically. They're not healthy in their areas of education. They're not healthy financially. They're not healthy spiritually and socially. But as a people of faith that believes in a power greater than we are, one day that answer should be yes. Our children are well. We wish to partner with lawmakers who seek to prevent young people from entering the justice system by investing in children within proven communities in which they live. We seek to work with lawmakers who want to protect children who become entangled in the justice system from torturous conditions that have no place in a country that claims to uphold human rights and dignity of all people. We want to work with lawmakers who recognize that everyone deserves a second chance, and a third, and a fourth, to redeem themselves and make their life a better one. Without hope for all of our children, how can we have hope for ourselves and our future? We're so proud to stand here today with Representative Lee-Conyers and Representative Sheila Jackson-Lee, who share in our belief in protecting youth and ensuring the sacred worth of all God's children. Their commitment to justice reform, as reflected in today's important legislation, is powerful and to be commended. And as people of faith, we pray and we work, and so we're ready.
We close now with the family who has a story. Their attorney, Paul Prestia, civil rights attorney, Mrs. Browder and Raheem. But let their story be America's story. White, Hispanic, African American, Asian, and others of all faiths. Let it be America's story. Will you all come forward now?
Thank you. My name is Paul Prestia. Khalif Browder was not only my client, he was more than a friend. Today I represent the Browder family, and we're here in support of the legislation introduced today. In 2010, Khalif was accused of a robbery, but ironically, it was the city of New York, its agencies, its individuals, its policies and practices, its entire criminal justice system, or system of injustice, that robbed Khalif of his innocence, his adolescence, and ultimately his life. Khalif spoke about his story. He wanted to tell his story. He knew he needed to tell his story. He understood the import and significance of what he had endured. And he knew that could affect change and make our system more just and prevent other young men and women of any color from going through that same experience which he had. That was his message, and now it's his legacy. Since his death, in light of his death, unfortunately, the city of New York has unveiled a repertoire of new reforms. Speedy trial legislation, bail reform, the abolishment of solitary confinement, which I think we can all agree has no place in our society.
Yes.
And today's legislation, particularly Browder's bill, goes along in that same instance to effectuate change in our system. And we're optimistic that this bill, that this legislation introduced today, and obviously that's the reason why we're here, because we've read it, we believe in it, is substantive. It'll be substantive and not superficial, and it will make a difference. And Khalif's legacy will transcend his death. And for his family, who lost a son, a brother, a nephew, an uncle, it provides them a measure of solace, a semblance of justice. So thank you for having us here today. Thank you.
I want to thank Ms. Sheila Jackson for allowing me to be here today. And as far as my son goes, Khalif wasn't one to really want to, stand out, to be noticed. He was quiet. But when it came time to tell his story, he mentioned in one of his interviews that he wanted his story told. Otherwise, he'd just be another criminal. Just thought of as another criminal. And he wasn't. He got arrested for stealing a backpack. So for a backpack, he did 3 years, 2 in solitary confinement, never went to trial. Tortured, actually tortured, until he just couldn't take it and he took his life. But solitary confinement, aside from the beatings and the starvation, is what really destroyed him. Mentally, we have laws out here in the street to protect little kids against child abuse. But what about when your child goes to a place like Rikers? They're still a child. As you heard today, the brain doesn't get developed really until like 25. So Khalif was still a child, but you abused him. So it's too late for him. But these new laws will help other kids, so that it won't be another parent staying up here going through the same thing. Future kids, unfortunately, if they have to end up in Rikers, they'll stand a better chance. They won't be so mentally destroyed so that they come out and want to take their life. So this should stop, nip it in the bud, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. I want to thank everyone for showing up. I want to thank everyone for trying to make the movement. My brother was a typical kid. He went in at 16. He went from being a boy to an animal because of how he was treated. Then when he came out, he actually started to become a young man. The system is what destroyed my brother. And thanks to these the new bill that's out, hopefully this will never happen again. Khalif was the youngest of 7, and he was loved by all his brothers and his sisters and his family, his parents, cousins. He had a niece and a nephew who loved him too. He loved them, and I just hope, because of all these reforms that's being made, a nephew, when I have to see his uncle being buried, and then the child is only 3 years old, and the father has to tell him, your uncle's sleeping right now. And that was the last thing my son did for my brother. He waved to the casket and said, bye, Uncle Khalif, go to sleep. And hopefully this will never happen again. Thank you.
Want to acknowledge Major Akil Hannon. Did that introduce? Yeah, thank you so very much. And Exodus again, Doctor, thank you so very much that are here. We are now open for brief questions, and let me thank all the persons. I think what I'd like to do, if we have a second, is just start from over here. Just introduce yourself. East Coast, you are?
Julie Stewart, President of Families Against Mandatory Minimum.
Reverend Michael Couch, African Americans Minister Leadership Council.
Thank you, sir.
Thomas L. Nelson, representing Noble and retired FBI.
Andre Alexander, National Council of Churches and Criminal Justice Coalition.
Suzanne Bergeron, National Urban League, on behalf of Mike Morial, National Urban League.
My name is Reverend Richard Cizik. I'm president of an organization called the New Evangelical Partnership for the Common Good. It's my delight to be here on behalf of evangelicals here in America, because this really matters.
Come right here and just say it in the
So I'm glad to be here. My name is Rich Cizik. I'm here for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that I'm a Christian. And I believe that Christians have to believe in restoration and reconciliation, as my colleague said, not retribution. I'm also here, I should say, because I lost a son after rehab, a heroin overdose. And I know what it means to lose a life, a family life, one you love. And so I grieve with you, and all of us here do. We all grieve for those who've lost their lives. And this is why this is so important. So thank you, Congressman and Congresswoman.
Thank you, sir.
Director for Noble.
Jaya Davis, University of Texas at Arlington.
I'm Melton High. I'm Sheriff in Prince George's County, Maryland, one of Maryland's 24 sheriffs, and also a member of Noble.
How many years, if you all don't mind saying, in service?
I've been in law enforcement for 45 years.
Clarence Cox, Chief of Police for the Clayton County School District, and also the second Vice President for Noble.
Years in?
Since 1981.
Sergeant Clyde Boatwright, Baltimore City School Police, and I've been in law enforcement for 15 years.
And Gregory Thomas, National President of Noble, 33 years in law enforcement.
Major Akil Hand, Baltimore City Public Schools Deputy Chief, 15 years in law enforcement.
Paul Presti, attorney, amongst other things, but...
Benita Browder, Khalif's mother.
Mother of 7.
Mother of 7, and 6 now.
Raheem Browder, Khalif's, one of Khalif's older brothers.
Sebastian Goodson, 25-year veteran of the prison system, special assistant to Dr. Madam Clinton Saddle Exit Foundation, National Director of Africa.
Chris Wilson, Director for Workforce Development for Greater Homewood, returning citizen and social entrepreneur in Baltimore City.
I'm Hillary Shelton, Director of the NAACP's Washington Bureau and Senior Vice President for Policy and Advocacy.
I'm Charles Witherspoon with retired 30 years with Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department, representing Exodus Foundation.
Reverend Don Thomas with ExodusFoundation.org, the National Director of Community Outreach.
Michael Lomax, President and CEO of the United Negro College Fund.
Madeline McClinney Sadler, President and Founder of ExodusFoundation.org.
Here's a guest here from Charlotte. Both introduce yourself, sir, again.
Good morning, I'm Franklin Lee-Conyers Senior. I'm out of corporate America, and I just have a vital interest in critical areas.
Thank you.
And I'm here for it.
This gentleman here.
I'm Eric Juniors. I'm the owner of the Juniors Group. It's a program that deals with reentry. I'm also a social professor at Allen University, and I attend UNC Charlotte.
Drove from South Carolina.
Any questions, please?
Hi, I'm Penny Starr with CNS News. When you say youth, as far as the legislation goes, what ages are you? Is it distinctive ages that are in the...
Yeah, we've raised the age. We frankly know that there is science that takes us to 24 and 25. We are trying to work with many different groups, and so we've raised the age up to 21. Previously 18.
So all ages up to
21, that's correct.
Mr. Conyers, do you think that a lot of what you're dealing with in this legislation is better dealt with on the state level? The attorney from Broward County mentioned the reforms that New York has already implemented, but a lot of these bills seem to go into things that state legislators have to handle rather than federal. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Sure. We know that the federal position on criminal justice matters are influence the states. And that's the whole idea, is that we work together. We don't mean to diminish their authority. We mean to encourage it and hope that their direction will take the same one that is being set forward by the gentlelady from Houston, Texas.
To add to that, in the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act, we found that a small percentage of law enforcement from 2 to thousands are not accredited. And this federal legislation tracks the President's Commission that was organized after Ferguson, and it gives a roadmap for law enforcement. That should be a national statement. With respect to the juvenile system, there are juveniles in the federal system, but again, as Mr. Conyers said, states take from us, we take from states, but there are many states that are not included in any reform, and so a federal statement then pushes it out by incentives for the states to look and reform their systems as we reform the federal system. So I think it is a synergistic relationship, and all I can say is our children deserve more and deserve the best, and if we have any impact on them changing in states that haven't even looked at this, this is why we have done it in this manner. Thank you.
We have time for one more question. Rachel with Politico.
Oh, yes, thank you. The Senate, in a couple of days, they're treating counter offers right now on a criminal justice bill. From what I understand, it's called Mixes the Corrections Act, which is a bill to allow inmates to earn time off their sentences for good behavior, to reduce recidivism, etc. And then the other part of that has to do with some mandatory minimums. But it doesn't say anything about the solitary confinement. It doesn't say anything about policing norms and practices. I guess my question is a package that doesn't quite go as far as you might like it, is it going to be, do you guys welcome any progress on this? Do you think you could potentially add to it? Because there are a lot of different moving parts of this, and it doesn't address these other two issues that you guys are talking about.
Well, that's what the conference committee is all about. The two bills frequently come out differently in each body of the legislature. And then through conferencing, we're able to work out the differences, and we hope that many of our ideas will be accepted by the Senate conferees, and that's the way we all get a single piece of legislation to the President's desk.
If I might add, that may be a good thing, because what it means, as the Chairman Conyers has indicated, we produce a product here in the House. We touch on and exhaust the issue of juveniles in incarceration and other legislation that deals with juveniles before they're incarcerated. Then we have a trust and integrity on law enforcement, which is really an attractive bill to bring all people together, and we use that vehicle that is moving from the Senate as a basis for expanding and solving problems that, as you can see today, really is a crisis in America. The issues dealing with our young people and incarceration, solitary confinement, the numbers are staggering, what is happening as we sit here today, with no rehabilitation. And then this whole idea, if you take a survey, you will find, even though there's an accreditation process and agency, that most of America's law enforcement agencies are not accredited. Yes, they are working. Yes, they're out every day protecting America's citizens. We applaud them. But what a new approach to have an accreditation process and incentivize. We're really looking for that bill to travel on whatever vehicle comes from the Senate.
Thank you, everybody.